My name is Ayo, and today we'll be talking about square roots. Um, Here are some examples of square roots, and square roots are basically just the quantity of a number that has been multiplied by itself. So we have 16. The square root of 16 is 4. The square root of 25 is 5. And the square root of 64 is 8. And that's because 4 times 4 is 16, 5 times 5 is 25, and 8 times 8 is 64. Adding and subtracting radicals. So first, we have negative 5 times the square root of 7 minus 3 times the square root of 7. And that's, so what we do here is since they both have the same sign, they're negatives, we just have to add the 5 and the 3, so that's 8, and then the square root doesn't change. So the answer is negative 8 times the square root of 7. For the next one, we have 8 times the square root of 5 minus 6 times the square root of 5. So then we just do 8 minus 6, which is 2. And so the answer is 2 times the square root of 5. For the last one, we have 2 times the square root of 8 minus negative 7 times the square root of 8. And so because we have two minus signs next to each other, those come together and make a plus sign. So now the problem becomes 2 times the square root of 8 plus 7 times the square root of 8, which is 9 times the square root of 8. Radical product rule. The radical products rule says the square root of a times the square root of c can be put under the same square root, so it looks like this: the square root of a times c. In numbers, the example would be the square root of 3 times the square root of 8, and then we'd put them under the same square root, so it'd be the square root of 3 times 8, and you can take it a step further and multiply the 3 and 8 to make 24, so now it'd be the square root of 24. Reverse radical product rule. The reverse radical product rule says that when you have the square root of a times c, you can break it back up to say the square root of a times the square root of c. Same goes for the number example. If we have, this is just an add-on step, so if you have like the square root of 24, then you would need to break that up to like the square root of 3 times 8, and then you would be able to do the square root of 3 times the square root of 8. Radical quotient rule. The radical quotient rule says the square root of a over the square root of a equals the square root of a over a. For the number example, we have the square root of 18 over the square root of 6 would equal the square root of 18 over 6. Reverse radical quotient rule would be this means that the square root of c over c would equal, or is the same thing as, the square root of c over the square root of c. The number example is the square root of 16 over 49, and that would turn into the square root of 16 over the square root of 49. Complex radical quotient rule says that a times the square root of c over x times the square root of n can equal a over x times the square root of c over n. The number example would be 3 times the square root of 6 over 5 times the square root of 7 would be 3 over 5 times the square root of 6 over 7. Rationalizing the denominator. So for this, the example is the square root of 5 over the square root of 18, and the 18 is not allowed to have a square root over it, so we have to make the denominator not be a square root. I don't know the reason for this, but that's just how it is. So we have to break up the 18 or the square root of 18. So now the problem becomes the square root of 5 over the square root of 9 times 2. And 9 is the square root of 3. So now the problem becomes the square root of 5 over 3 times the square root of 2. And so now we have to have the 2 or the square root 2 like disappear in some type of way. So we end up doing the square root of 5 over the square root of 3 times the square root of 2 times the square root of 2 over the square root of 2. And this equals the square root of 5 times 2 over 3 times the square root of 2 times the square root of 2. And that takes us to the square root of 10, because 5 times 2 is 10, and over the square root of 3 times the square root of 4. And the square root of 4 is 2. So now we have the square root of 10 over 3 times 2, and 3 times 2 is 6. So the answer is the square root of 10 over 6. And that's it. Thanks for watching.